Hello everyone and welcome to Ukraine This Week with me, Dawn Arleth. Kyiv takes out a top Russian general in Moscow, and could EU troops be deployed to keep the peace in Ukraine? We'll have more on that in this edition, but first up, let's go to the latest news straight out of Ukraine. Over the past several days, Russian forces have continued widespread attacks across multiple Ukrainian regions, resulting in significant casualties and damage to infrastructure. According to regional authorities, at least 5 civilians were killed and 20 others injured in these assaults.
2 women were injured in the Kyiv region and 2 men sustained injuries during a drone attack in Mykolaiv. Strikes in Kherson left 1 civilian dead and 5 others injured. Casualties were also reported in Kupiansk, where 15 houses were damaged. A Russian attack also claimed a life in Pokrovsk. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted 45 of 85 Shahed-type drones and other UAVs, with electronic warfare neutralizing 40 additional drones. In the Chernihiv region, a police officer and a teenager were injured in a shelling, while a missile strike in Kryvyi Rih damaged critical infrastructure, but caused no casualties. The Kharkiv region saw civilians injured in Tsirkune, and the Kherson region recorded another death and 2 injuries. Other regions, including Cherkasy, Kyiv, Sumy and Zaporizhia, also faced attacks, but reported no casualties. Homes, schools and hospitals were damaged in the strikes.
Crimean Tatar leader Mustafa Dzhemilev has praised the Czech Republic after it officially recognized the deportation of Crimean Tatars by Soviet authorities in 1944 as genocide. The operation caused the death of tens of thousands under the harsh conditions of exile.
80 years ago, over 3 days from May 18th to May 20th, 1944, Soviet security forces rounded up at least 200,000 Tatars on the Black Sea peninsula of Crimea and brutally sent them into exile in Central Asia. Tatar leader Mustafa Dzhemilev said the recognition means even more than usual for Crimean Tatars, as Russia has been occupying Crimea since Moscow illegally annexed the peninsula in 2014 and has continued its ongoing full-scale invasion of Ukraine, launched almost 3 years ago. The deportation of the Crimean Tatars, like those of several other Soviet ethnic populations around the same time, was ordered by dictator Joseph Stalin. It was followed by a campaign of de-Tatarization in Crimea, during which the culture of the Turkic Muslim people was virtually erased from the peninsula.
Environmentalists are sounding the alarm after 2 Russian oil tankers broke apart and ran aground in the ecologically sensitive waters of Ukraine's Moscow-annexed Crimean coastline. Local media has reported thousands of tons of low-grade fuel oil spilled into major Black Sea shipping lane.
The incidents, which occurred on December 15th, left 1 sailor dead and forced the evacuation of 26 crew members from the vessels Volgoneft 239 and Volgoneft 212. Officials have said that crew error during stormy conditions was to blame and that there was no evidence of any links to Russia's war in Ukraine. Both tankers were laden with large cargoes of fuel oil. The Volgoneft 212 is said to have been carrying more than 4,000 tons of heavy pollutants, leaving the potential for one of the largest environmental disasters ever in the Kerch Strait, which is a key shipping lane. Russian state news agencies quoted sources as saying some 3,700 tons of mazut, a low-quality heavy fuel oil, had spilled into the water. Moscow has been using a so-called shadow fleet of tankers, a group of old, uninsured oil vessels, to bypass Western sanctions imposed over its full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Ukraine's Human Rights Commissioner has revealed Russian intelligence agencies are attempting to recruit the families of Ukrainian prisoners of war for espionage activities. The move blackmails vulnerable Ukrainians for the benefit of Moscow. Additionally, authorities in Kyiv have also reported almost 200 confirmed executions of soldiers in captivity.
Nearly 4,000 Ukrainians, primarily military personnel, have been released from Russian captivity through prisoner exchanges. Many of them have reported severe torture and mistreatment during their detention. Russian intelligence agencies are using pressure against the families of Ukrainian prisoners of war to force them into psychological operations against their own country. In some cases, families looking for their relatives contact Russian authorities directly. Initially, they are given limited information, such as images or opportunities to speak with their captured closest ones. However, these interactions come with conditions. Families are subsequently instructed to carry out specific tasks for Moscow. Over 16,000 Ukrainian civilians remain in Russian captivity. Only 168 individuals have been freed. Moscow troops have also deported 19.5 thousand Ukrainian children to Russia, with fewer than 400 successfully returned to Ukraine. Many of these children have faced coercive adoptions and indoctrination in Russian institutions, raising significant concerns about their well-being and rights.
And now here's a quick look at the strike on Kyiv that rocked the Ukrainian capital earlier on Friday. And now it's time to look at the war in Ukraine through the lens of a journalist. And for that, we're now joined by our correspondent in Kyiv, Oz Chatterjee. Hello, Oz. Now, Volodymyr Zelensky said security guarantees without the United States is not enough. Can you run us through the Ukrainian president's speech there in Brussels?
Well, I mean, it's nothing we haven't really heard before in so many ways. This is more the case that Ukraine is reiterating its position. It firmly wants the kinds of guarantees that NATO Article 5 allows. And without that, it just doesn't see any kind of diplomatic route out of this. And this is not just the Ukrainian government's view. This is the view of the Ukrainian people consistently when they're polled. It's not just a matter of can they seek an agreement with Russia. It's that they don't trust Russia to keep to agreements that it's had. And given the course of history, the Budapest Memorandum onwards, including the Minsk Accords, Russia has violated every agreement, every internationally binding resolution that it has made with regards to Ukraine. And the Ukrainians don't trust Russia not to just try and freeze the conflict lines and then invade again when it has rebuilt the strength to do so. So the Ukrainians obviously are looking for much firmer guarantees if they're going to be forced into any kind of compromise at the moment. They're going to want cast iron assurances that the world will come to Ukraine's aid in the way that they haven't done since the first invasion in 2014.
Right. Well, maybe EU troops or some members of the European Union, maybe some of their troops in Ukraine can do that. Now, diplomatic missions in this strike on Friday were hit. We're hearing that Albania, Argentina, Palestine, North Macedonia, Portugal, Montenegro, their diplomatic missions damaged in a missile strike. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Russia has shown flagrant disregard for international norms, as it's proven day in, day out in Ukraine. Obviously, this is going to be alarming for the international community that diplomatic missions could be hit in this way in a missile attack on Friday. However, there just doesn't seem to be any recognition from the international community or understanding of what they can do to try and alleviate the situation or try and hold Russia accountable for these kinds of acts. There isn't really much information beyond that. I mean, really, Ukraine will want more support in light of these events. But with Donald Trump coming in, we don't know what's going to be moving forward. It's many of those countries listed are countries that have good relations with Russia. So it doesn't seem like Russia really cares about ruining those kinds of relationships by taking actions such as these, which really violate international norms.
All right, Oz Kaderji joining us from Kyiv. Thank you very much for that. European leaders are actively exploring the possibility of deploying peacekeeping troops to Ukraine as part of potential security guarantees in the event of a ceasefire or a peace deal. The initiative has gained traction in the midst of uncertainties about U.S. support under incoming President Donald Trump.
Proposals for the peacekeeping force suggest it could involve between 40,000 and 100,000 troops. This would be a significant commitment, stretching European military resources, particularly if countries reduce their involvement in other missions, such as those in the Balkans. In Brussels, Zelensky met with NATO chief Mark Rutte and a group of European leaders who seek to develop their own plans if Donald Trump, who has pledged to bring a swift end to the conflict, pulls support or forces Kyiv to make concessions to Russian President Vladimir Putin to reach a ceasefire. France, Germany, Italy, Poland and the UK are expected to form the backbone of the project. Swedish Defence Minister Pål Jonson has also indicated Sweden's willingness to expand its presence in Ukraine. Key challenges include the mission's composition, mandate and rules of engagement. Some leaders, like Italian Defense Minister Guido Crosetto, propose placing the mission under UN auspices, but this could grant Russia undue influence due to its veto power on the Security Council. Additionally, European nations may need US intelligence and operational support to enhance the mission's effectiveness. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky welcomed Macron's initiative during a Brussels summit, emphasizing that security guarantees are crucial while Ukraine continues its path toward NATO membership. The alliance has reiterated its intention to admit Ukraine eventually, but no timeline has been set.
And now I'd like to welcome to the program Gary Tabak, former Chief of Staff at the NATO Military Liaison Mission in Moscow. Hello, Gary. Thanks a lot for joining me on Ukraine This Week.
Hello, Don. Always good to be on TVP World.
Now, Gary, based on what we're seeing coming out from the United States, what's your latest take on what Donald Trump is going to do? I mean, obviously, he said that the situation in Ukraine is much more complicated than he anticipated, and he may not be able to end this war in 24 hours. So what's your latest assessment on what is likely that we'll see from the Trump administration?
Well, I agree, Don. It's a very complicated situation. Every time I get back to Ukraine, it gets more and more complicated, and it's getting more complicated. And as President Trump is saying, what could we do to stop this mass killing and destruction of the entire nation? And he has mentioned many times that he's going to do it through peace, through strength. So what in reality could be, sorry for redundancy, in reality realistically can be done? And that is probably bringing some kind of force into the region. If we're talking, and I'm not sure whether we're talking about the United Nations, and again, as you mentioned, the Russians can veto it and Security Council. If it's going to be United Nations, well, I was part of the UNMIC, United Nations military mission in Georgia, and it is very corrupt. And as we can tell, no UN forces have ever been able to prevent anything or to stop anything. We can see what's UN DOF in Israel, in the Golan Heights, they couldn't do anything. Again, UNMIC in Georgia couldn't do anything, really. So maybe the best option is what it is that President Trump is talking about, you know, the peace through strength, making a coalition of such countries as Great Britain, United States, Poland, and something that would be resembling what it was in Yugoslavia. And that way, in Yugoslavia, it did work. We did stop the mass killing in the region that way. Maybe that would work, but it is very, very complicated, as you say.
Yeah, and well, and that's the question. I mean, without an invitation to NATO, and if Ukraine is to even consider any kind of ceasefire or some kind of peace deal, they're going to need some troops to back that peace deal, because Russia will violate it. Now, I want to ask this. If you have foreign troops, say Polish troops or French troops in Ukraine trying to secure some kind of ceasefire or peace deal, what happens in the event that they are actually attacked by Russians? What happens under NATO's Article 5, if we can speculate a little bit there?
Well, Article 5 does not guarantee you that even if your country, not just your troops on the foreign land, but even if it's in your country, you're being attacked by somebody, it is only considered that all of the countries are being, all the countries got attacked at the same time. But doesn't mean that they all have to respond. They all have to take some kind of part and start negotiations and start talks and start roundtables, who can do what to assist the attackers. So the Article 5 does not clearly state that everybody will get involved in this kind of conflict. But also, the idea is it's not only Ukraine has to agree to foreign troops to be present there to support them, but it also Russia has to agree to it as well in order to conduct the ceasefire. Otherwise, maybe we can get some sort of a truce that way that is similar to Korean war. But going back to Yugoslavian scenario, in Yugoslavian scenario, Russians were part of the peacekeeping force there. Of course, as you say, they violated it immediately as soon as they got there and conducted their own operations, taking over the airport. But that is in the past. This is the lesson we have to learn. And it's going to take all kinds of players in it, and somebody will have to give in something. Everybody's not going to be happy with that resolution. But again, realistically, what other options do we have? Continue to fight and continue the destruction of Ukraine? That's not an option. Pushing Russians into conducting more aggressive ways. It doesn't have to be a nuclear or even tactical nuclear attack. They can blow up another dam. They can blow up a nuclear reactor. We can see that the environmental disaster that's probably equivalent to a nuclear explosion in the Black Sea that they have just conducted, with their spilling all the oil into the Black Sea and causing that disaster. And this has to stop somewhere. So let's see what President Trump will be able to do using his tactics and his techniques by carrot and stick or whatever that he has in his mind to do. But all I'm asking is give him a chance. Give him a chance to do something without criticizing it right away or knocking it down.
Now, what do you
today Europeans are doing? Yeah,
mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
What do you think the likelihood that Russia is going to come to the table in any good faith, and will there be consequences for Russia if they just not engage in meaningful talks and negotiation process?
Well, on one hand, I'm not. I'm very biased in this. I don't believe anything that Russia says or anything that comes out. They have violated every agreement that has been made with them. Not Russians, but Putin and his thugs violated every agreement that we have signed or we came to since World War II. So there is very little trust or no trust on my part when it comes from Russia. But on the other hand, Putin is saying right now that he is willing to speak to the United States. He's willing to negotiate. He's willing to open some doors. So we'll have to see how they will react to President Trump's negotiation technique. Of course, Russia has things to lose. Economically, there are turbulence inside of Russia. It's not a monolithic society. So we can have other things that President Trump has used previously, such as sanctions that are much tougher, such as negotiating with other countries. Russia cannot remain in a vacuum. Such countries as Saudi Arabia with oil prices, China, and negotiate with them, come to certain agreements saying, listen, this has to stop at one point or one or another. During World War II, We were allies with Russia, with Stalin. I don't think he was much better than Putin. Winston Churchill was allies with us. And all of the three leaders, Winston Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt, did not see things together. They were not great friends, but they realized that they have to come to some sort of agreement and do something about Hitler. Otherwise, it would get completely out of hand and the whole world is going to blow up. So the same thing today. Maybe we don't see things with China, the same with Saudi Arabia, with India, but we all have to come to a realization that the threat to all of us comes from newly arrived and raised by us, Hitler.
Now, in the event that Donald Trump pulls his support for Ukraine, U.S. support for Ukraine, and it really comes down to the wire for Europe, and Europe will have to step up and potentially send in some of these peacekeeping troops to try and shore up the situation in Ukraine. Can Europe do this? Does it have the capabilities to conduct such a mission without U.S. support?
Well, I can't speak for the entire Europe, nor can I speak for Poland, but my experience in Poland, 20 years ago, that Poland can't do it on its own, I bet. The thing is, it's a political will. Will they have that political will? Trump doesn't show any kind of sign saying that he's going to pull out or not assist Ukraine in its struggle. Trump is saying that Europe has to take a bigger part. They have to play a bigger part because this is what's going on in Europe, not in the Americas. It's going on in Europe, in the backyard of the European Union. So Europeans and particularly the old Europe, not the new Europe, not the Baltic states, not the Poland, he's not addressing it to them. He's addressing to the old Europe saying, listen, you got to take charge of it. Because of you, 2 world wars have happened, and this is a 3rd world war is going to happen again because of your incompetency and your impotency trying to play up or to deal with a tyrant. So he's being tough on Europeans, but I don't think President Trump is showing any kind of signs that he's going to pull out and just ignore what's going on in Ukraine. I think on the contrary, he continues to say that there is going to be that there's going to be peace through strength. And he, of course, appointed as an envoy to Ukraine, General Kellogg. And General, it's different from the previous envoy who was Kurt Walker, who was a diplomat and a great friend of Ukraine. This time he's appointing a very experienced combat, war-tested general. So I don't think that's a sign of he's going to pull out. Maybe on the contrary, that he's going to engage.
Yeah, and he seems to have a very good idea of what Russia really is and how it behaves there in Ukraine. Final question before we end this conversation, and that is, of course, would European troops in Ukraine, would there be a large risk that any country that sends their troops there could become into a direct military conflict with Russia?
Well, Don, every time you send troops, every time you bring military equipment in, there's always a big risk that it's going to be used. But at the same time, if you bring professional troops, if you bring modern equipment, then there's also less risk that it's going to happen. The more you're prepared for war, the less the possibility that it's going to happen. The less you're prepared for war, but you keep rattling sabers and saying, we're going to do this and we're going to attack, we're going to kill them, we're going to slaughter them, that may also happen. So as long as it's done professionally, organized, and in a united way between our allies, I think that will prevent the war, that will show the seriousness on our side to Putin, because until this point, all he could see is that we were not serious. We were saying things, we were promising things, where we had round tables, we had meetings in Germany, we had NATO, but nobody took any actions. Nobody provided enough weaponry to Ukraine. Nobody did anything seriously to damage Russian troops on the Ukrainian soil.
Yeah, maybe it's time for Europe to put its money where its mouth is. Gary Tabak, former Chief of Staff at NATO Military Liaison Mission in Moscow. Thank you very much. Always love having you on. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Thank you so much. Bye.
Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov met his end in Moscow on December 17th. He was reportedly killed by a bomb attached to a scooter planted by the security service of Ukraine.
An SBU source has stated Kirillov was considered a war criminal and a legitimate target as he gave orders allowing the use of banned chemical weapons against Ukrainian soldiers. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, more than 2,000 Ukrainian servicemen have been hospitalized with chemical poisoning and 3 have died. Chemical agents such as chloropicrin were deployed via drones, inflicting severe injuries while violating the Chemical Weapons Convention. Kirillov was recently charged in absentia for these crimes by Ukraine and sanctioned by the UK and Canada. Born on July 13, 1970, 54-year-old Kirillov was the head of the Russian Armed Forces Radiation, Chemical and Biological Defense Troops. The explosion, targeting Kirillov and his assistant, occurred outside a residence on Ryazansky Prospect in Moscow. Russian investigators suspect Ukrainian involvement, detaining 2 suspects allegedly linked to the SBU. One reportedly admitted to the attack, motivated by a $100,000 offer. Beyond his military role, Kirillov propagated disinformation. Shortly after the launch of Russia's full-scale invasion, the general made it his mission to convince the world that Ukraine was hosting US-funded bioweapons sites. Kirillov was also instrumental in spreading false claims that Ukraine was developing a dirty bomb, a crude nuclear device designed to contaminate a wide area with radiation, making it uninhabitable.
And now here to discuss this, I'm now joined by Alexei Goncharenko, Ukrainian MP from European Solidarity. Hello, Alexei. Great to see you, and thanks for joining me on Ukraine this week.
Great to see you. Hi.
So from Ukraine's perspective here with Igor Kirillov, what was his role in Russia's war against Ukraine, and how would you rank him on Ukraine's target list?
He's in top of this target list, definitely, because he is the most high-ranked Russian military general who was destroyed and killed during this war. And he was leading the special part of all Russian armed forces. And he was responsible, as you said, about more than 4,800 cases of using of chemical weapons against Ukrainian army, which is clearly forbidden by international conventions. So he is a war criminal. He was a war criminal, first. Second, he was one of those who were organizing all this illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. 2. Thirdly, he was very heavily involved in propaganda against not just Ukraine, but against the whole civilized world, because he was telling all this, he was spreading all these lies about biological laboratories of Americans in Ukraine and Europe. He was spreading some, sorry to say this, kind of a bullshit about mosquitoes infected by special agents to kill Russians, about the birds, and I'm not joking now, the birds which differ Russians from Ukrainians. Maybe they see the color of the passport, I don't know, or DNA, and then attack with the viruses those who are Russians. So it was a completely crazy guy and completely crazy Russian agent, but very brutal one and real murderer. And it's absolutely great that he is finally destroyed and he paid his price for what he did.
Yeah, now the Kremlin claims that they've caught the assassin. Do you think they got the right guy?
I'm not sure, by the way, because they claiming some Uzbek citizen telling that he is responsible. And it is a part of Russian agenda of accusing some foreigners in what's happening in such attacks, in the terrorist attacks in Russia, and so on. So I really don't know. And I'm not sure that he is responsible.
Now, do you think that this will have any impact on the battlefield now that this general is taken out?
I'm being frank, Russia will change this general by another general. So I can't tell you that it will be a huge difference. But I think part of Russian highest ranks will remember that if they will commit war crimes, like using of chemical weapons, killing of civilians, and so on, they will pay the price. I think this is a very good signal to them.
Now, how difficult is it to carry out such an operation like this?
I don't know. I was not one who was in charge, but I can just praise those who did it in Moscow, in the middle of Moscow.
Oh, well, we lost our connection with Alexei Goncharenko, Ukrainian MP from European Solidarity. And that concludes this edition of Ukraine This Week. Join us again next week for all the latest updates in the war in Ukraine. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time. Goodbye.